So far on this course, I'm your instructor, Dr. Henry Agorunche. We'll look at the course description, that at the end of the day, that you explore how conceptions and experiences of race and ethnicity affect daily life, and also abroad using various sociological perspectives, focusing on historical and current issues. You as students examine how individuals experience and challenge the socially constructed labels of race and ethnicity in your society, in your working place, and learn how these ideologies are maintained. Just a quick to remind you about the course objectives is to develop foundational knowledge on the concepts of race and ethnicity. Also, for you to understand how race and ethnicity are associated with inequities in education, housing, and employment, especially in this COVID period now. You will see what is happening to employment. So another factor we're looking at in the objectives is that you understand how racism operates at interpersonal and structural levels of society. If you have not been noticing them, you from this moment right now, since we have started this course, you will have been noticing and observing day by day from all your reading from news, from the society, what it's all about. And we look at the course objective that to develop well-informed arguments about race and ethnicity and deliver this in written and spoken form. So it's very, very important. And we have discussed about the learning outcomes. Just to remind you, quick reminder, that upon successful completion of this course, the student will have reliably demonstrated their ability, number one, to examine sociological perspectives and concepts related to racial and ethnic issues home and abroad. Very, very important. We will be able to assess historical factors and their implications on race and ethnic relations. Not only that, you will be able to analyze social inequality using theories in your own understanding of structural influences. Very, very important. And also to analyze racial and ethnic identities as experienced by individual groups. So, having dealt with that we have looked at various introduction to racism and ethnicity, and we'll look at all those ones. And today, we'll be going further from what we have discussed earlier on understanding the difference between the race and ethnicity, and all those things we have thought of during this process. But today, we'll be looking at the theories of race and ethnicity. The theories of race and ethnicity. The learning objectives for this particular topic for today is that by the end of this section, you'll be able to describe how major sociological perspectives view race and ethnicity. And furthermore, you identify examples of culture and prejudice. Now, theoretical perspectives. We can examine issues and race of race and ethnicity through three major sociological perspectives. One, functionalism. Two, conflict theory. And number three, symbolic interactionism. One, functionalism. Two, you look at conflict theory. From there, you look at this symbolic interactionism. As you read through these theories, one thing that is very, very important, you have to ask yourself, which one makes the most sense and why? Do we need more than one theory to explain racism or prejudice? Or stereotypes? You begin to look at this as you begin to examine this during this process. You'll be able to look at things we call discrimination. So now considering the functionalism, so in the view of functionalism, of course, is problematic. Why? How can racism racism and discrimination contribute positively to society? Nash, in 1964, focused his argument on the way racism is functional for the dominant group. So a functionalist might look at functions and dysfunctions caused by racial inequality. So these are things you need to look at. Nash, in his own this argument, for example, suggesting that racism morally justifies a racially unequal society, and consider way slave owners justify slavery in the antebellum South by suggesting black people are fundamentally inferior to whites and prefer slavery to freedom. Another way to apply the functionalist perspective to racism is to discuss the way racism can contribute positively to the functioning of society by strengthening bonds between in-groups members through the ostracism of out-group members. Consider how a community might increase solidarity by refusing to allow outsiders access. On the other hand, Rose in 1951 suggested that the dysfunctions associated with racism include the failure to take advantage of talent in the subjugated group, and that society must divert from other purposes the time and the effort needed to maintain artificially constructed racial boundaries. This is argument. Now you can look at it when you consider how much money, how much time, and how much effort went towards maintaining separate and unequal educational system prior to the civil rights movement. So there's time involved, painstaking time, money, and effort are very, very important to what Rose was talking about in his own suggested uh, dysfunctions associated with the racism in 1951. Now let's consider conflict theory. Conflict theories are often applied to inequalities of gender, social class, education, race, and ethnicity. For example, a conflict theory perspective of US history will examine the numerous past and current struggles between the white ruling class and racial and ethnic minorities. When you look at this now, noting specifically conflicts that have risen when the dominant group perceive a threat from the minority group. In the late 19th century, the rising power of Black Americans after Civil War resulted in draconian Jim Crow laws that severely limited Black political and social power. In this case, right now, for example, Vivian Thomas in 1910, lived between 1910 and 1985, the Black surgical technician who helped develop the groundbreaking surgical technique that saves the lives of blue babies, was classified as a major or was classified as a janitor for many years and paid as such despite the fact that he was conducting complicated surgical experience. This is purely because of his background, of his race. The years since Civil War have showed a pattern of attempted disenfranchisement with gerrymandering and voter suppression efforts aimed at predominantly minority neighborhoods. So in 1990, Patricia Hill Collins, a sociologist, developed intersection theory, which suggests we cannot separate the effects of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and attributes. It can't be separated. When we examine race and how it can be also both have advantages and disadvantages, it is important to acknowledge that the way we experience race is shaped, for example, by our gender and class. You can't rule that one out. Gender and class brings into this, and possibly because it's a feminine person, you could be able to bring this into understanding of what the gender and class and sexual orientation has given in terms of all this understanding. So when we examine race and how it can bring us both advantages and disadvantages, therefore it is very, very vital and important to acknowledge that the way we experience race is shaped, especially by our gender and class. Multiple layers of disadvantage intersect to create the way we experience race. Now, let's take for example, if we want to understand prejudice, we must understand the prejudice focus on a white woman because of her gender is very different from the layered prejudice focus on a poor Asian woman who is affected by stereotypes related being poor, being a woman, and her ethnic status. So these things are very, very important as you begin to look at race and ethnicity, both nationally and internationally. And it could be classified as being home and abroad. So these things are very, very important as you come to understand it. Now, let's look at internationalism now. This interaction is very, very important. For symbolic interactionists, race and ethnicity provide strong symbols and sources of identity. In fact, some interactionists propose that the symbols of race, not race itself, are what led to racism. Get it clear? Get it clear? Race and ethnicity provide strong war symbols as sources of identity. Because when you see the race, when you see the ethnicity right now, it projects some symbolic things out to people there as an identity. In fact, some interactionists propose that the symbols of race, not race itself, are what led to racism. Herbert Blumer in 1958 suggested that the racial prejudice is formed through interactions between members of the dominant group, because it's the interaction that brings about those things. Without these interactions, individuals in the dominant group will not hold racist views. It's because of those interactions that brought it to play. These interactions contribute to an abstract picture of the subordinate group that allows the dominant group to support its view of the subordinate group. Get it clear? The interactions contribute to an abstract picture of the subordinate group that allows the dominant group to support its view of the subordinate group. And this maintains the status quo. And they begin to see themselves in that eyes. An example of this might be an individual whose beliefs about a particular group are based on images conveyed in popular media. And those unquestionably believe because the individual has never personally met a member of that group. They have a different views. And those views are sometimes absolutely wrong based on their perception. Because you have not interacted with this group, you don't even know exactly what it is. But based on what you have heard or what you have heard in the news or the vice versa, then you begin to bring on some insinuations that are baseless, that are full of prejudice. So another way to apply the interactionist perspective is to look at how people define their races and the race of others. They look at it that this one is higher, this one is this one is that. As we discuss in relation to the social construction of race, since some people who claim a white identity have a greater amount of skin pigmentation than some people who claim a black identity, how did they come to define themselves as black or white? Even with all this prejudice of I've never seen any black person, neither have I seen any white person. If you see this paper is white or we have never seen. But because of description, you have never seen somebody so black, because of this pigmentation. And there are advantages to everyone. So this one will lead us to culture or prejudice. Culture or prejudice refers to the theory that prejudice is embedded in our culture. No matter the culture where you come from, prejudice is embedded in it. We grow up surrounded by images of stereotypes and casual expressions of racism and prejudice. Consider the casual casually racist imagery on grocery store shelves or stereotypes, or when you are trying to shoot film, you depict this one to be black, devil is black, and something that is white is something good. All those things, those imageries should have been created are some certain things that brings about inferiority complex to people, and give some race or some ethnic group to say, okay, we are this, we are more than this, we are better than this in some certain situations and circumstances. Now, consider the casually racist imagery on grocery store shelves or the stereotypes that fill popular movies and advertisement. It is easy how someone living in the northeastern United States who may know Mexican Americans personally might gain a stereotype impression from such sources as Speedy Gonzalez or Taco Bell's talking Chihuahua. So because we are exposed to these images and thoughts, it is impossible to know that what extent they have influenced our thoughts. Mostly our thoughts are largely influenced most of the time because of what uh, we look at and what we see in most of our thinking and our reasoning. So it's very, very important for you to understand things that you watch and how you can breed up prejudice from your own thought in terms of gender, in terms of relationship, and most of the time, if you are not careful, you bring a lot of prejudice and biases into your thinking. In fact, when some people are doing some studies, they bring some biased mindsets into it, and we have to be a little bit very careful. Just like uh, when you are studying the human anatomy, and now you discover that the convolution gyre in the brain and all the rest like that are both black and the so-called white. There's no difference. There's no difference. So these are things you have to be a little bit very, very careful about when you are looking at the issue of prejudice and all those things. So know that the theories of race and ethnicity are very, very important in your thinking and your reasoning as you begin to look at it. Is what we give you check and balances. We give you check, and whatever you are trying to put across, you won't be biased because generally people are biased based on their on some certain thoughts that have been given, some things they have read about some certain places. And this is why you must have a broad mind. You must have you need to be somebody who is very broad in mind. You have to have a large heart, study and read wide. Read some certain historical background, read about some biographies. It's going to help you in your dealings most of the time. And even when you are going to be a very good judge, a good counselor, it will help your perspective very well when you understand all these things. You don't bring your prejudice to the table. You don't bring your biases to the table. If not, a lot of people will be marginalized. A lot of people will not have their rightful placement in what they need to do in life. And this is very, very important for us to be very, very careful at most of the times when we are opportune to be a leader. To be a leader is something that will be very expensive if you are a prejudiced person, a person that think otherwise on matters. So from this one now, we're going to look at the historical perspectives. Racism in the modern world, historical perspectives on cultural transfer and adaptation. When you read Manfred Bach and Simon Wendy from pages 1 to 19, although the term only gained currency during the 1920s and 1930s, racism, both as a set of ideas and a social practice, has much longer history. Broadly speaking, the concept has been predicated on the belief that mankind is divided into distinctive entities, commonly called races, which are delineated by descent and phenotype and regarded as primordial, static, and homogeneous. However, the assertion that race determines not only physical appearance but also intellectual abilities and culture has been a key tenet of racism. Finally, it is advocates have tried to establish a natural hierarchy and also supposedly superior and inferior races. That's why we have a big challenge in our society, in the whole world today, even especially the challenge we're having in this COVID 19. So these are challenges that people look at and then begin to put their primordial, their static and homogeneous ideas forward. Like I've said, the assertion that race determines not only physical appearance but also intellectual abilities and culture has a key tenet of racism. So you have to note that racism in Africa is multifaceted and dates back several centuries. It was originally strengthened by European colonialism, under which boundaries were drawn and did not take into consideration the different peoples dwelling within the newly formed provinces. And these have been the created problems of the colonies. The boundaries were little changed when former European colonies gained independence. As a, as a consequence, some African nations have been plagued by inner conflicts, prejudice attitudes, and tribal warfare. So these things are things that need to be looked into because of the political inclinations of the colonialism. People are grouped based for them to be able to rule them, and the considerations were not put in place to really understand that these people are not together. And where this won't bring about social inequality. And I'm going to take it from Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a free encyclopedia. We're going to look the on-point view. It says social inequality occurs when resources in a given society are distributed unevenly, typically through norms of allocation that engender specific patterns along lines of socially defined categories of persons. And when these things are being done, people are just being brought together. They are not of the same mind, they are not of the same type. It creates some certain biases and prejudices. It is the differentiation preference of access of social goods in the society through about by power. So society bring this thing about power, and then you see people begin to change locations and do this one now. So number one thing you need to consider there is the power. Number two is religion. Number three is prestige. Number four is race. Number 5 is kinship. Number 6 is ethnicity. Number 7, gender. Number 8, age. Number 9, sexual orientation. And then finally, 9, we look at the class. I said it is the differentiation preferences of access of social goods in the society brought about by 1, power, religion, kinship, prestige, race, ethnicity, gender, age, 8, sexual orientation, and 9, class. Social inequality usually implies to the lack of equality of outcome, but may alternatively be conceptualized in terms of the lack of equality of access to opportunity. Therefore, the social rights include labor market, the source of income, healthcare, and freedom of speech. Amongst its education and political representation, not only that, political participation, political representation, political participation. Excuse me. Social inequality linked to economic inequality, either in academics, either in influence, either political, it brings about it. Even in healthcare, even with your income, depends on the area where you can be. So social inequality linked to economic inequality, usually described on the basis of the unequal distribution of income or wealth. It's a frequently studied type of social inequality. We'll be looking at this critically because this is what races and ethnicity and prejudice and biases bring about to people's life in society. For example, in this COVID right now, there will have been inequalities, but it's not that the inequalities are not still there because nobody can travel abroad. Nobody is accepting people from other countries. So now, the healthcare that the people did not put in order, they are bound to face with it because now everybody somehow becomes equal. But even among these myths, not everybody is equal. Even when you are talking about taxation and all the rest, even why the government say don't tax so and so, the people who are in the place of the government, the agencies, they still tax the people. Those are the people they go after, and they will leave those people who are not to be involved and leave them. So most of the time, the social rights, either in the labor market and the source of income, healthcare, freedom of speech, education, political representation, and participation. Because some people can just be kept incommunicado. They can be kept and begin to be disenfranchised of what belongs to them. Even when during this period right now, when some things are to be sent to the masses, it doesn't get there because there's greed. There's greed. You still want to take what belongs to somebody, and you just store it there to waste it. The people you're supposed to get to it can't get to them. These are some challenges that we're facing in our society. And as a student, I want you to look at it, to be able to come out in your own little way that it can help you to understand. I said social inequality linked to economic inequality, usually described on the basis of unequal distribution of income or wealth, is a frequently studied type of social inequality. Although the disciplines of economics and sociology generally use different theoretical approaches to examine and explain economic inequality, both fields are actively involved in researching and on this inequality. However, social and natural resources other than purely economic resources are also unevenly distributed in most societies and may contribute to social status. Norms of allocation can also affect the distribution of rights, the rights and privileges, social power, access to public goods such as education or judicial system. And these things are very, very bad. You see, some people are being left alone, while some people who know nobody, they face some judicial prejudice. When you talk about adequate housing, is it the incapacitated ones? Do they consider them at work? Do they consider them on the road? Do they consider them in what they manufacture for the usage or public utilities? Do they consider them in transportation? All these things are to be looked into. These are some societal and strata that have been created and that is creating more problem for the society. And even when you look at credit and financial services, such as banking and other social goods and services, in some of the countries, especially in our country, you see the banking sector right now, they just click on the masses and begin to claim some taxes that they claim from them monthly, weekly, some services that are supposed to be free. What of the telecommunications? So these are things that on these social services or social goods and services that need to be looked into. Many societies worldwide claim to be meritocracies. That is, their societies exclusively distribute resources on the basis of merit. The term meritocracy was coined by Michael Young in his 1958 dystopian essay, that is the rise of the meritocracy, to demonstrate the, the social dysfunctions that they anticipated arising in societies where the elites believes that they are successful entirely on the basis of merit. No matter who that individual is, you might assume that you succeeded on merit. But when it's closely examined, everything might not be total merit. So the adoption of this term into English without negative connotations is ironic. Young was concerned that tripartite system of education being practiced in the United Kingdom at the time he wrote the essay considered merit to be intelligence plus effort to its possessors. Identify at an early age and are selected for appropriate intensive education, and that the obsession with qualification, test scoring and qualifications is supported will have create an educated middle class elite or elite rather at the expense of the education of the working class, inevitably resulting in injustice and not only that, eventually revolution. Although merit matters to some degree in many societies, research shows that distribution of resources in societies often follows hierarchical social categorization of persons to a degree true significance a warrant calling these societies meritocratic, since even exceptional intelligence, talent, or other forms of merit may not compensatory for the social disadvantages people may face. So in this meritocracy or meritocratic is something that is good if talents, either in sports or in any area of life endeavor, could be looked into and they are searched for, and then they are given the advantage being on their merit. Yes, I think years back in the secondary school, people who go to secondary modern school to see people doing inter-house sports. So by so doing, they give some kind of people who are very talented, they give them privilege apart from the issue of the academic, they give them advantage to be more. Okay, 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 okay. Yeah, at this point, we'll be concluding from here, and then next week we'll continue and conclude this lecture. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay blessed, stay healthy, and prepare for your exams. Go for your mock and do the rest. It is well with you. Do have a beautiful weekend.